I'd like to thank you for watching our podcast and our study in the book of 1 Corinthians. Today we're in 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, starting with verse 11. Now let me give you just a little bit of background because we just ran out of time on Friday. If you haven't listened to Friday's podcast, go back and listen to Friday's podcast of last week because this, again, it all ties together. And one of my emphasis in my life is that we take Scripture in context. And so go back to Friday's podcast and listen. But the Apostle Paul starts out with these words in verse number 11. Again, 1 Corinthians, the 10th chapter, verse number 11, says, "Now these things happen to them as an example." Well, if you didn't listen to Friday's podcast, you have no idea what the things that happened. And so the Apostle Paul has just given us a list of 6 things that happened to the children of Israel. And those things are things like adultery and immorality and several other things. And so he's saying that these things happened to the Israelites, but they happened for our example. Now, the Greek word example, it means to strike or to mark something. You know, have you ever had maybe a piece of jewelry or something like that, and it was struck on the back and it said, 20 carats or 10 carats or whatever in size? Well, what happened there? It was struck. Something was struck into that metal, into that gold, that told us the quality of that gold. And the Apostle Paul is using a word here that actually would be used in the making of jewelry. It would also be used in the signet ring, which would press into wax and leave a seal. The Apostle Paul said those things that happened to Israel, they didn't just happen because God was mad at Israel. They happened because God is using them now as an example to the Corinthian church and to us believers of what not to do. And so the Apostle Paul goes on and he says, now, these things happened to them as an example, and they were written for our instruction. What happened? They were written down. These things were actually written down in the history of Israel. Every Israelite knew what happened. It was part of their history. And let me just say this. Some people say, well, I don't read the Old Testament. Well, I'm sorry. You should be reading the Old Testament. Why? Because it was written for our instruction. So we see 2 words here, example, something to press into us, and our instruction means something to admonish or to warn us. And then the Apostle Paul goes on, beyond whom the ends of the age have come. What does he mean by that? Paul is talking about the time period from Christ's ascension to this day. In other words, what Paul is saying is those things that happened in the Old Testament, those things that happened, and again, it's the listing of those 6 things, they are there until the end of the age. In other words, they are good for us today. They are good for us right now, here in 2025. They are good for us today. Good for us as examples, something that we need to pay attention to, something that's pressed into us, but they are also good for our instruction. So again, read your Old Testament, because those things that are written in there, they're good for an example to you, and they're good for an instruction to you. And then we go on now into verse number 12. And he says, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he falls. Now, we've talked to you already several times over about the problem in the church at Corinth. You see, the problem in the church at Corinth wasn't the immorality, and it wasn't the disunity, and it wasn't the idol worship and all those things. The real root problem in the church at Corinth was pride. It was arrogance. Several times already we've seen the Apostle Paul talking to the church at Corinth about their arrogance, about their pride. And notice what he says here. If you think you stand. Now, the problem again is that the Corinthian church thought, hey, we're cool. We're standing. Let me bring you to a proverb. This proverb is in Proverbs 16, verse 8. And it says, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before fall. It's still true. It's still true of us today that if we think that we can make it on our own, if we think that we stand because of maybe the church that you go to, or because of outward external things in your life, maybe because of some revelation of truth or of error, and you think you stand, the Apostle Paul gives this warning, and it's the same warning that was given in the book of Proverbs, that pride goes before destruction. If you think you're standing, if you think that you're able, if you think that you are able in yourself to make it, wow, what a statement. I can do this. No, you can't. You know, every day I get up and I say, Lord, I need your help. Now, I've preached thousands and thousands of messages over the last 48 years of ministry. But you know what? This morning when I got up and I proceeded to come down here into the studio, I said, Lord, I need your help. You see, that's the stance that every believer needs to take. Lord, I need you. I am not able to do this by myself, but you have given me grace. What is grace? Grace is an unmerited favor. It's something that comes to us in an unmerited way, but it's also something that strengthens us and enables us to do what we need to do, including living the Christian life. Let he who thinks he stands take heed. Take heed. What does that mean? Take heed. Be able to see. Be able to understand that you don't stand alone. You don't stand in your own abilities. You stand in the grace of God. Brothers and sisters, today I want to admonish you. You can't make it on your own. Tomorrow we're going to take a look at temptation. And this all ties together. But you know what? When you face temptation, you can't make it on your own. Wow, I've got self-control. No, you've got Spirit-produced self-control. I hope that you understand this. Join us again tomorrow as we continue this study in the book of 1 Corinthians.